Well, good morning. I am so glad that you're here today, and I'm glad to be here myself. I wanted to mention to you, if you haven't already got one, that our Christmas catalogs went out last week. This is a way that we do our Christmas offering. We break down a bunch of different projects, both here and far, and just celebrate Christmas. I actually went back this week to the first year that we did this, and I looked at and I watched the service, which is ironically oddly still on our church website. You can still get to sermons from like 2012 on our church website, which my staff says I don't look any different. So they got their Christmas bonus. But all that being said, it was the first year that we introduced this concept of putting together a Christmas catalog and all the neat things that we get to do and actually have a choice and a hand in celebrating Christmas. David, can I give you that, buddy? So grab one of those and look through it. It's a fun way of just figuring out how to disperse our Christmas offering. And I know a lot of people like the year-end giving, and they like to give extra at Christmas. And so it's just something fun that we do here to celebrate and have fun giving. And last week we started with our Christmas series. We started talking about getting beyond the glitter, getting beyond all of the tinsel and decorations. And really what we want to do is we want to get back to what Christmas is about. And a lot of the things that we are familiar with, a lot of the things that have been introduced and brought along are things that, for lack of a better term, have started out maybe in a good spot, but then they've kind of gotten, too much sprinkles on them. You know, you ever get a cookie and it's got sprinkles on it, and sprinkles are nice, but then you get one that's got too many sprinkles on it? And you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. It just gets too much glitter on it, and you kind of like, you're just like, let's take a layer of that. It's just too much. I don't know. Some of you like the corner piece on the cake. I understand, and that's fine. Your diabetes is probably going to be different than mine, but but we've done that with Christmas. And last week we talked about Nicholas of Myra and how big a deal Nicholas is to us in our modern context, and what we talked about with Nicholas and our kids is we celebrate his generosity and his gift giving. But really, one of the things that set Nicholas apart historically is his passion for the deity of Christ. And so we talked a little bit about Nicholas last week and about who he was and what he was about. And if you weren't here, you can go back and watch that on the website too. And today I want to do something as well that I think is kind of one of those traditions that we do that we don't really fully understand, and that we do it and we don't really know where it came from or what it's about. And it's the idea of a Christmas tree. And I don't know, we didn't really have Christmas trees growing up. My family, we lived in Key Largo, and so in Key Largo there was not a lot of trees to begin with, right? And so here we are. And every Christmas, we would rotate between Greenville, South Carolina, where my mom's mom lived, and in a little town called Eatonton, Georgia, which, if you know who Uncle Remus is, you know about Eatonton. That's Uncle Remusville right there. And so every year, we would not do a Christmas tree at home because we would go to a grandmother's house for Christmas over the river. No, it was a lake, I guess. Over the lake and through the woods to grandmother's house we go. And my one grandmother, she lived on Little River Run North Southwest was the name of her road. I guess there was a little river there somewhere, but to get to her house you had to go anyway through the woods. And so that was kind of the tradition. We didn't really have a Christmas tree in our home. It was, we would get there at Christmas and Grandma would have a Christmas tree. And as I got older, and as in my college experience, I started to lose my grandparents, right, in that window thing. And then my parents stopped going to Grandma's house for Christmas. And one of the things that I realized as a young person in college is I was going to come. I was in Florida here at Clearwater going to college, and my parents had rested and landed in North Carolina, and they didn't have the tradition of, I don't think we had a fabricated fake tree. And that was one of the things that was kind of weird to me, is because now I'm going home for Christmas and there's no tree. And it got to this thing where I went out and I got the Charlie Browniest tree I could find over, just like, I think it was a white pine. I don't think it was not a Douglas fir. Let's just put it that way. It was just a pine tree, and drug that sucker into the house, and doggone it, we're going to have a tree for Christmas. And I don't know where this concept of going out into the woods and cutting down a perfectly happy tree came from, dragging it into our house. And I know our pets are probably, like our cat this morning started, I say our cat. My daughter brought her cat to my house last night. And it found the tree this morning and was chewing on things at the base of the tree. And then it returned them. But don't you know that your pets are confused when you go out over the river and through the woods and get a perfectly happy tree? A tree that represents life, an evergreen tree, a tree that's full of life and perfectly shaped, and you murder it and drag its carcass into the living room and stand it there, and your pets are like, what in the world has gotten into this person? They are dragging trees from the outside that are inside, but you're not done. You take the lights that are inside, and what do you do with those lights? You drag them outside, right? And that's our, why in the world, where in the world did this concept of bringing trees into our homes come from? And I have Facebook too, so I see all of this conspiracy theory about it's some worship of some crazy false god that's crept into our we're worshiping, we're laying our gifts at the base of this god Tannenbaum. Old Tannenbaum, right? And there's and the reality is none of that is anywhere to be found in any mythology or any false worship. This is a totally Christian tradition of taking a tree and bringing it into our home. And I want us to get past the glitter today and talk about some trees. Is that okay? Like deep theological. Last week we talked about Santa Claus, and this week we're talking about Christmas trees. But trees are very important to the life of a believer, and that is because life began in a garden. Trees are important because life began in a garden. When the garden of God, we had the tree of life. The tree of life was there in the garden, and that tree of life represented what we long for as people. We long for life. We long, one of the things, the reasons that compels us to go and to bring an evergreen tree is that when everything else in the world is dying and decaying and showing its death, that at Christmas time, out of all of the other trees, there is this one tree that shows life. And we long for that. There was a time when we had life, and that life was with God. And inside of every one of us is a soul that longs to return back to that place where man would walk with God. Would you stand? We're just gonna stand for one verse. I'm not breaking down an entire passage today. We're gonna hit a lot of Bible today, but I just still want to stand in honor of God's word. Genesis chapter 2, verse 9 says, "And out of the ground the Lord God made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." You may be seated. So here is this garden of God, and there is every tree. And God places within that garden every tree, but then in the middle of the garden, the centerpiece, the point there are two trees there in the middle of the garden. There is the tree of life, the tree of God, the tree that God gave us, that fellowship, that life that we have with God, where we would enjoy God and we would spend time with God. It was heaven, as every day they got to experience God in a new way. If you had questions, you could just say, hey, God, what's this about? Or, hey, God, what's this called? Or, hey, God, what is that like? Or, why did you do this? Or, why did you do that? All of our discovery and all of our joys were there in the middle of the garden. But also in the middle of the garden was a tree of choice, described here as a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That with the tree of life, God also gave us a tree of option. God did not create robots that had to do what He programmed us to do. He created us with volition. He created us with the ability to make choice. And so there in the midst of the garden, you have the tree of life and you have the tree of the knowledge, the experience, the understanding of both what is the differentiation between good and what is evil. I struggle with God in His omniscience knowing what I would do with that tree. To make it there, God, could you not take that tree of the knowledge and could you not just kind of tuck it away and put it somewhere else? It's too much for me. I can't overcome the temptations that come along with that. Why does it have to be here where I cross paths with it all the time? It's like if you were trying to get rid of cigarettes, what do? You don't like leave them on your dashboard of your car, right? And you don't leave them on the bedside table, and you don't leave a pack in the kitchen right there by the sink. You take whatever you got and you crumble it up and you throw it away, and you try not to keep it around, because if it's around, you're just going to stumble into it. God, why did you not take the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and put it miles away from where I was going to spend my day? But God there put the tree of the knowledge of good and evil right in the middle of the garden, right next to the tree of life, because it was a tree of decision, the tree of option, and God gave us a choice. It was in this choice, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that mankind took and made an willful act of defiance against the Almighty. Genesis 3:6 says, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. You can imagine how God's heart was broken and the anguish as God silently watched Adam and Eve opt out of a relationship with Him. I don't know if you've ever had someone opt out of a relationship with you, but it hurts deeply. Somebody who you love, somebody who you have created a home for, and somebody you have poured your life into and centered everything on. They see you for who you are and they say, no, thank you. The deepest hurt is not when our spouse dies, but when our spouse looks at us and says, you know what? I don't love you anymore, and that's what we did to God. God, I don't love you anymore. God, I don't want you anymore. I don't want that life with you. I don't want to walk with you in the evening. I don't want to bring my concerns and my questions to you. I don't want to do life with you anymore. I want to know what it's like to run my own life and to be my own God and to make my own choices, and I am going to take this option. And look at Adam and Eve and we shake our head as how sinful they were. Genesis 3:24 says that God drove man out of. So he drove out the man, and he placed cherubim at the east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. And so God, because he does not want man to be an eternal sinner, drives man away from the tree of life so that he cannot, as a sinner, partake of the tree of life and be eternally stuck in sin, that man will experience death. We look at Adam and Eve and we shake our head at how willfully sinful they are, but we would have made the same choice. It's as if God in this moment begins to plant the seed of the tree of redemption. The tree of redemption comes to us, and it's explained in John 3:16. It says, "For God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life." We celebrate Christmas because God sent his Son to die on a tree. Jesus was born in order to die. That the purpose of his coming was his leaving. That Christmas, if Christmas is about anything, Christmas is about Easter. It's the story of redemption. Galatians 4:4 says, "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons." Here we are, and time had come for God to send Jesus Christ to this earth so that he could buy us back. Why? Because we made a choice of the tree of decision. We made a choice to choose the tree of the knowledge of good and the experience and the knowledge of evil over the tree of God. And so because we chose door number 2 or tree number 2, Jesus was sent to die on tree number 3. God fully intended our soul's desires for tree number 1, but in our willful sinfulness, we chose tree number 2, which necessitated tree number 3. Colossians 2:13 says, "And you, being dead in your trespasses, he is made alive together with him, having forgiven you all trespasses, having wiped out the handwriting of requirement that was against us, which was contrary to us, and he's taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the tree." And then all of our trespasses, all of our sins, all of our choices, every day when we choose tree number 2, and we choose to lie rather than choose to tell the truth, or we choose to exceed the speed limit rather than to obey the speed limit, or we choose to take something that doesn't belong to us rather than being content with such things as you have. Every time we take the Lord's name in vain, every time that we don't have faith in God when we should, every choice that we make is a number 2 tree choice. God took all of that, bundled it up, and nailed it to the cross. And because of Adam's sin, we lost the first tree, and because of Christ's death, we can have it back. And I think, and this is conjecture, I think that's how we got into the habit of dragging tree number 4 into the house. I don't really know. I looked into it. I really don't know where this concept of dragging a perfectly happy tree out of the woods and into our living room came from. But I believe that tree number 4 represents hope. Getting back to tree number 1. Look at Revelation 22, verse 14. Blessed are those who do his commandments, that they may have the right to the tree of life and may enter through the gates into the city, heaven. Here at the bookends of the Bible, in Genesis, we lose the tree of life, but through the process of coming into full relationship and back to obedience with God, we have access at the end back to the Christmas tree. Back to the tree of life, the tree of relationship with God, that although we chose not God, that God made a path back to the tree of life. So what do we do? What do we do with these trees? I believe our response this Christmas needs to be return to the garden. To get back to that relationship, that life that God intended, that we stop making wrong choices in tree number 2. We fully accept our Adamic nature. It's a big theological phrase right there. In fact, spell check doesn't like the word Adamic. Adamic just means you get it from Adam. Adam, you know what Adam means? Man. This is who you are as a person. Your nature as a person is to choose tree number 2. What show is that? Let's Make a Deal? Where they have to. I keep falling into that mode of like being off of school in the summer and watching daytime game shows when I was a kid, and you had to choose what was behind door number 2, right? And the audience knows where the good stuff is, and the poor sucker who's on stage has no clue, and he's going to make the wrong choice, and he chooses the wrong thing, and rather than the new car, you hear the wah wah wah, and he ends up with the bad thing, and we're that sucker, right? We're that guy. And one of the things you've got to do if you are going to get back to the tree of life that God intended, you are going to have to first of all accept that you would choose every time. You would choose exactly like Adam chose. Like we like to go tisk tisk tisk, Adam, how could you? Or we like us guys, we like to blame Eve, right? All Eve's fault. Here's what the Bible says about our nature. Ecclesiastes 7:20. There is not a just man on earth or the International Space Station. There is not a just man on earth who does good and does not sin. Psalm 51, David says this, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me." He's not saying that his mother was unfaithful and he was born of adultery. What he's saying is she was a sinner, and as soon as I was conceived, I was in sin. I've been a sin since I was a zygote. Is that the right term? Good, okay. I was a sinner from the beginning. And I know what you people who love babies are thinking right now. Oh, babies aren't sinners. Oh, yes, they are. I had somebody, Pastor Zach preached last year, and somebody told me they didn't like his sermon because he said that babies are full of sin. I think he used his kids as examples, and I've met his kids. But the reality, they didn't like it because and I'm like, well, that's the truth. We are sinners by nature. It's our Adamic nature that we are sinners. Romans 5:12. Therefore, just as through one man, Adam, sin entered the world, and death through sin, thus death spread to all men because all sinned. We've got to realize that every one of us, if we were placed in that perfect environment, that perfect garden, with that perfect choice between a tree of life and a tree of decision, we would opt for the knowledge of sin. We would want to know what it was like. We are curiosity that kills the cat. Dude. As soon as that tree... You guys have your tree up? I asked you that last week, and some of you did not have your tree up yet. You are dilly-dallying if you don't have it up by now. But here's the crazy thing. As soon as you cut that tree down at the tree farm, or as soon as the... Jeremy, can you step out to the lobby and help them? As soon as you cut that tree down, or as soon as the person you bought that tree from cut it down, as soon as it was cut from the ground, that tree stepped from life to where? To death. As soon as that tree was cut off from this earth, that in my living room right now, I have a perfectly dead tree. An evergreen tree that is no longer alive. It's not going to survive. In fact, it's already showing the signs of death. Its little needles are beginning to fill my vacuum. That we as soon as it was cut off, and so there's all kinds of tricks, and you guys know the tricks, right? If you do a live tree, you know the tricks, right? You have to put it in water. So you put water in it, and there are other tricks. One of the tricks I learned is that if you go to the Lowe's and you get some Miracle Grow, you guys know this trick? You put some Miracle Grow into that water, guess what? Your tree comes to life? No, all you are doing is prolonging its death. That tree, the moment it was cut off, was 100% dead. Dead. Completely dead. And there's nothing you can do, no trick that you can do to bring it back to life. I did discover that there's this thing that, I don't know, really good tree huggers do. They buy living trees. You can buy a living tree now with a root ball on it. And I thought it would be kind of neat to kind of start doing that at my house, and then just start planting them like a hedgerow between me and the neighbor, and leave them decorated. And then I could say, hey, remember the tree from 1997 and 1998? And they would get like progressively shorter, right? Or they would grow, and then the decorations would get nastier every year, and this would be, and so maybe we'll start doing that next year. I don't know. But the reality is there's nothing you can do to bring that tree back to life. And the same is true with us and our nature of Adam. That the moment we sin, the moment we opted for tree number 2, we chose death. And there is nothing, there's no Miracle Grow, there is no amount of water or sunlight or anything we can do to bring ourselves back to life. That moment we were cut off from life, that moment we were cut off from God, we are separated from God into death. Look at Ephesians 2, however. This is the big turn. First letter or first word there is the word kai in the Greek. It's also sometimes translated but. It's this concept of a transitional. We were dead in our trespasses and sin, but He did what? He made us alive. We were cut off from life. We were 100% dead. There was nothing we could do to bring ourselves back to life, but God made us alive who were dead. So this is what the theologians call the great exchange, where God takes our death from us and gives us life. This is who we are as Christians. This is what Christianity is all about. Is that moment where we move from not from life to death, but from death to life. One of the reasons we celebrate the tree, one of the reasons we celebrate God is in that evergreen nature is not because there was a tree that was alive which is now dead, but there was a tree which is us that was dead which is now alive. And so maybe one of the reasons we started bringing trees into our home that were evergreen is to celebrate Christ's death on the cross that gives us life. One of the neat things that happens at my house is we had a lot of these pine trees. They're not Christmas trees, but they're probably the closest thing we have around here to Christmas trees. But these trees in the springtime and right before Easter, there's this amazing thing that happens here in Florida. And I think it happens in other places, but there's this amazing thing that happens to the trees here right at the edge of Easter. And I want to show you a picture of it. That all the trees at my house start to spring this pollen blossom of crosses. And I just think it's the most magical, it's the most amazing thing that it doesn't matter whether Easter lands in March or April, it's almost always just at Easter that the evergreen, the tree of life, the tree of God turns a corner and begins to say, hey, guess what? Don't forget about the cross. So we acknowledge our Adamic nature, we acknowledge who we are, but then what we do then is that because we realize that we're dead and we need to return to life, we turn to the tree of redemption, the cross. And maybe today the step for you is to say, you know what? I do believe I'm a sinner. And maybe today is not just to believe and identify that you're a sinner, but to accept the cross. We don't know what kind of tree the cross was made out of. There are a lot of different legends, myths, stories that have been kind of made up over the years to say, you know what, I think it was a dogwood tree because a dogwood flower is the shape of a cross. Or maybe it was a mistletoe, someone said, because a mistletoe has been cursed and it is what it is. And people tried to come up with what kind of tree it was, and really there's no indication anywhere of what kind of tree it would be. If it was made out of gopher wood like the ark was, that's kind of a fancy thing to think that the Noah's ark was made out of gopher wood, and so maybe the cross, because the ark symbolizes the cross, that it was also made out of gopher wood, but we really don't know. Here's what I do know about the cross. The cross was both the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because it was at the cross that Jesus, who knew no sin, became sin for us. So for the first time at the cross, Jesus experienced sin. He knew sin. So in some ways, the cross was the tree of the knowledge of evil. That Jesus, who only knew good, now knew evil experientially. God knows evil. So in some ways, it's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but also in some ways, the cross is the tree of life. It's not just the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but the tree of redemption is the tree of life. It's where this great gift exchange takes place. You do gift exchanges? You pick names for people you don't like in your family? Or if you get dad, like if you go through the gift exchange and you get dad, you're sunk. Right? The guy does not need a tie. Like, what in the world am I going to get that guy? How did I get stuck with him? Why can't I get the 3-year-old who was happy with whatever? right? When you do the gift exchange, the cross is the greatest gift exchange ever. It's where he who knew no sin became sin for us. He took our death and he gave us life. And maybe today the way you respond to return to the garden is to believe in the cross of Christ, to place your faith and trust in what Jesus did on the cross as payment for your sin. And if you're a believer, you probably have to go through that process on a daily basis. Lord, I sinned again. I chose tree number 2. God, forgive me for choosing sin because I really want to dwell in life. I really want to have that life with you. God, forgive me again. I messed up again. I lied again. I stole again. I cheated again. I thought wrongly again. I did not experience faith again. And maybe you go to the cross often. I think another thing that we can do in response to all of these trees is to celebrate that evergreen nature. Yet we have, through Jesus Christ, we have eternal life, everlasting life. There's this crazy thing in theology where Adam had life, but he had the option of death. And he chose death. He chose sin. Those of us who are believers, who have accepted the cross, will have everlasting life. The weird distinction between us as believers and Adam as in his perfect state is Adam had the capacity to choose tree number 2. In heaven, there is no tree number 2. There's only tree number 1. That in heaven you will not have the capacity to choose incorrectly. You will no longer have the capacity to choose option not God. Satan had that, right? Satan in heaven, Lucifer, had the ability, and he chose not God. He chose tree number 2. But as believers, when we arrive in heaven, we will no longer have the option to choose death over life. Because if we did, guess what we would do? Every time. The reason we have everlasting life is because sin is done away with. It's carried away and it's tossed into a lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. All of sin and all of evil is taken and it's sequestered away from us. It's no longer in the midst of the garden as an option for us to choose. It's not even in the corner of the garden. It's not something we can say, you know what, I bet I could find it. Because you know what, if we could find it, guess what we would do? We would build a treasure map. And we would hunt down that choice and we make it. But God gives us everlasting life. And aren't you glad that your only option as a follower of Christ is if you choose tree number 3, you get the tree of life. The tree of death is taken away. My master's degree is in religion. And I'm fascinated by religion. I'm fascinated not just by the Christian faith, but I'm fascinated by all religions. As I was getting ready for this message, I was so looking forward to finding this little hidden, manuscript of some ancient, archaeological dig where they found where the origin of the Christmas tree came from, because you hear all this conspiracy theory that it's some kind of false worship and it's some kind of fake God, and that we are laying our gifts at the base of the altar to this tree god. And there's some people that say, well, the worship of Odin, but the worship of Odin was about oak trees, and it was about burning them down. There was nothing about dragging them into your house and decorating them and making them pretty. The Tannenbaum is really, you know what Tannenbaum means? Fir tree. It's just the Germanic name for a fir tree. It's not. There's no god Tannenbaum. Tannenbaum means fir tree. So when they would sing Old Tannenbaum, they weren't worshiping some crazy god. And my penchant for our archaeology and religious studies really wanted to find that nugget, right? And it wasn't there. And somewhere along the way, some Christian said, you know what? Here's the crazy thing about Christmas trees, about these fir trees. They are constantly doing what? Pointing to heaven. They have life. Here's our homework for the week. Don't fail to convey the story of the trees. Because when we share the story of the trees at Christmas, we can bear fruit. Trees are about fruit. Your homework is this. Number one, live humbly and grateful. That if you don't do anything else, this Christmas, like these trees, just point upward. Say, hey, you know what? I am just like Adam. I would have chosen tree number 2. I choose tree number 2 every day. But in the realization of that, it's all about God. John 10:10, Jesus says he came that we might have life and that we might have it more abundant. We know that we would have chosen sin, but he came to give us life. And so we humbly and gratefully live out our days just pointing to heaven, just saying, you know what, I am so wicked, I am so sinful, but God gave me tree number 3. Your other homework assignment this week is to abide in that everlasting life. We're coming up on the solstice. The darkest days of our hemisphere. And the darkest days are the coldest days. Days where all the other trees are shedding their leaves and taking on the appearance of death. And as all the other trees take on the appearance of death, there is a distinction between the trees of death and the darkness and the cold and the tree of life. And your homework is to not be the cold, depressed, complaining, smelly, rotten people of death. Why? Because you are a person of life. That God made you alive who were dead in your trespasses and sins. You chose death. God says, oh man, I'm bringing you back. And he gives you life. And so for you as a child of God, for you who has life, to not be full of life, to join the crowd when everybody's like, oh, the sun goes down at 4 o'clock and it's so cold up here in Canada. And we walk around, and we're in Florida, right? But we walk around, oh my goodness, it's 60 degrees. And we're so depressed and we're so down and we're so sullen, and God says, that's not how I want you to live. I gave you life. So everybody else, they can be the maple trees, and they can be the oak trees, and they can be deciduous. They can throw off their leaves and walk around to death, because that's the world, and the world is death. But you are different. May I call you Douglas? I'm going to do that. You're Douglas. Your last name is Fir. You are a tree of life. So do what? Give life. Live life, and then give the gift of life. Share that with others. This week, your homework, Douglas, is to live differently. You were dead, but you're not dead any longer. You have life. Everything else around you is dead. Everything else around you appears dead. Everything else around you carries itself as dead. Why? Because it is dead. But you are different. You have tree number 4 in your house because you have tree number 1 in your heart. And although Adam and Eve chose tree number 2, God sent tree number 3. And I think we put tree number 4 to remind us we have tree number 1. I don't know why we decorate it the way we do, and I don't know why we do this as a ritual, but here's what I know. I know that when it comes to picking out the right tree, that our soul longs for the tree, but our flesh tree of separation. And God brings us the tree of redemption, and through that, we can return back to the tree. So it's okay if you want to have a Christmas. It's okay if it looks like Charlie Brown's Christmas. But don't fail to tell the story. The trees. Let's bow our heads.